with the admin stuff out of the way, I'm pleased to welcome Rose, Rupert and Ryan for today's panel discussion on technology in education. And we're going to have a particular focus on artificial intelligence. Let me just introduce the panelists, and then I will hand over to each of them in turn to speak to us for 3 to 4 minutes each before we go over into a panel discussion. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Rupert Wegerup, who is Professor of Education at the University of Cambridge and is also Director of the Digital Education Futures Initiative at Hughes Hall, Cambridge. His research focuses on education for dialogue in the context of the internet age. He researches dialogic theory in education and ways of teaching through dialogue and teaching for dialogue in classrooms with technology. He's co-lead with Sarah Hennessy of the Cambridge Educational Dialogue Research Group and co-convener of the Argumentation, Reason and Dialogue Special Interest Group of the European Association of Research on Learning and Instruction. Welcome, Rupert. Ryan Irving, meanwhile, is a PhD student in education at the University of Cambridge, and he's experienced in facilitating collaborative projects between innovative technology and education, and is passionate about promoting dialogue in pedagogy. He's currently a researcher on the Falaj project and working with Digital Education Futures Initiative. Ryan recently won the Editorial Board and Readership Award from the Cambridge Educational Research Journal. He ran a makerspace at a middle school in San Diego, California, where he taught technology and English. He now lives in Cambridge, where he loves to make, break, and fix things with his children. I can relate. I'm better at the breaking than putting them back together again, but welcome, Ryan.
Thank you.
And last but most certainly not least, Rose Luckin, who is Professor of Learner-Centered Design at UCL Knowledge Lab. Her research involves blending theories from the learning sciences with techniques from artificial intelligence. She's author of Machine Learning and Human Intelligence, The Future of Education in the 21st Century, Director of Educate Ventures Research Limited, a London accelerator for educational technology startups, President of the International Society for AI in Education, co-founder of the Institute for Ethical AI in Education, member of the UK Office for Students Horizon Scanning Panel, advisor to the Topol Review into the NHS workforce, and finally, and not surprisingly, one of the 20 most influential people in education, according to the Selden list in 2017. Welcome to the three of you. We are very honored to have all three of you with us. So, as I outlined, I shall hand the floor to you for 3 to 4 minutes each. As I say, if anybody in the audience, if you have any questions or observations or comments, please do put them into the Q&A chat Q&A window, and we'll address those as we go along. Rupert, could we start with you, please, for some thoughts from your point of view?
Oh, yes, thanks very much, Eric. I started in the field of AI in education with a PhD with a team doing lots of AI research way back in the 90s when AI was just about to transform education and everyone was working on intelligent tutoring systems. And I'm in a way pleased to see that this is finally working some 30 years later, and they have all these intelligent tutoring systems and Squirrel AI and Centurion and Sparks, but they're focusing on individuals in a sense, more efficiently learning content. And what I was always interested in was how computers can facilitate small groups learning by talking together and thinking together. And this is really crucial in learning a language, the ability to produce, to ask questions. And it's quite hard for teachers to manage. So we ended up teaching ground rules and structured ways of talking with little cue cards. But of course, when the teacher's not listening, the conversation can often drop. I found this recently with a lot of Zoom work with students. You put them in little groups and they report some groups work, some groups don't. Now, this is where I'm excited about AI. There hasn't been enough research on AI supporting collaborative learning, but it's very possible and very doable. I know from my own research that machine learning can actually assess the quality of the process, the amount of reasoning, the creativity, And therefore, we could have EduBots not only online, but also face-to-face, doing this very simple moderating task, asking people, what do they think, bringing them in, asking, why do you think that? And modeling the kind of use of language. I think this would be a great help for English language learning. And we're working with partners in China who want to do this face-to-face, but we can also do it online. Is that about the right amount of time there, Eric, or am I?
Fantastic. Perfect. Spot on 3 minutes. Super. Thank you very much, Rupert. So an angle there on AI within the context of collaboration, collaborative learning. Yeah,
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ryan, over to you, please.
All right. So coming from a teacher's point of view and also a site technician for teaching technology to other teachers at the school and working with admin, I'd say that whenever teachers hear about AI, there's many different things they think. Are they thinking of, you know, is this going to, as Rupert's saying, is it going to be able to facilitate a discussion? What can it do? I think most of them are introduced to it where I taught in California through the computer adaptive testing that we do with the state, and also for the Lexile and the reading levels. So I think they're very much associated with, at least by the teachers I worked with and myself, with kind of rote tasks for now. They haven't been seen as useful for bigger things, at least in the mainstream district that I was working in. But I'd say that teachers may have some ethical concerns or concerns about where the data is going to go if more information is being taken in by the companies and then used. Because it's one thing to have a Google form grading and telling you multiple choice, is it right or wrong? But then as the teacher, you know, I'll go back myself and read the open responses or some of the longer short answers. But as far as the potential for it, I can see how many teachers would love the time it would save in grading or some of those tasks that they could go get personal. So I guess there's a shift in the role I see for the educator. So more of a facilitation. So I think many teachers are worried about losing that human element because of AI, but I think on the contrary, it would maybe free up more time to do those things, especially as more classes are going to online. So as a teacher, if I have 20 students, let's say primary, secondary age online talking to them, it's a lot harder to get that one-on-one time when I'm just going over material. So perhaps if I could work out a way to I don't want to say the word automate, but I can't think of a better word, a way to kind of set processes for some of the more procedural steps that we need, then I could free up time to talk with individual students. And then I think the potential for schools, that would just mean training all across the board, hire more people that are embracing tech. But it looks like I've got pretty close to my time as well. So I'll pass on to Rose.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Your timekeeping is impeccable so far. Fantastic. Thank you. Rose, over to you, please. And you're on mute.
Has to happen. I'll try not to let the side down on the timing. It's really interesting. I'm going to come at this from the learner perspective. Professor of Learner-Centered Design seems very appropriate. And pick up on that point about adaptivity that Ryan made. I think one of the big advantages for learners is the possibility that they can have adaptive feedback as they're learning a language whenever they need it. That's what AI brings the possibility for. And that can be very valuable, whether it's about speaking, listening, reading, or writing, although writing is harder for the AI. I think that's hugely beneficial. And it's available 24/7, whenever they want it. And one of the final things I think is really important is that it can be quite a private dialogue. So if you're not feeling very confident about speaking in German and that's the language you're learning, you can have quite a private dialogue with an AI. And I think that's very beneficial. So I think there are lots of benefits for learners, not least the fact that they can then see how well they're doing. They can understand more about their strengths and weaknesses, which is great for the teacher, but it's also great for the student. And that also feeds back onto something that Ryan said about teachers' role changing. You know, I think, yes, more mentoring, more picking up on what the AI might be able to tell us about a student's learning, and then enriching the way that we're able to mentor, to support students, because we've got that extra amount of information that we haven't had before. So I agree on that front. I think there's also some interesting risks, and ethics is definitely the big one. But I think it's hard to sum up what that looks like. It might be something we want to come back to in the questions and answers, I'm not sure. But I also like to pick up on what Rupert was saying, because Rupert and I were kind of working about the same time originally, all those years back, Rupert, when we did our PhDs. Yeah, and you're so right. That's exactly, it was going to transform education then. And actually, it's only just starting to reach the point where there's the potential for that transformational power. And one thing I worry about in that, and it relates to what you were saying, you know, the importance of that nuanced dialogue that's so important for learning, and certainly an AI can help with that. I completely agree. But I do worry about now it's scaling where the power sits for that scaling process. I don't feel there's enough power with the teachers and the learners, and perhaps too much power with some of the large tech companies. And that feeds into, I think, concerns about ethics and whether what's really best for the learner is going to end up being what ends up being scaled. And I'll stop there, hoping to have done my timing, even though I was on mute to start off with.
Spot on. Thank you
Thanks,
very
Eric.
much, Rose, and thank you very much to the three of you. Some great stuff there. A few points I'd like to pick up on, please. Something that Rose, both yourself and Ryan, you picked up on. Ryan, you said that there are issues around data. Where is the data going that we feed into the AI bots? Rose, you on the other hand said that it's a private conversation. If I'm practicing my German, it's a private environment. Is there a right and wrong? Is it inherent in the nature of AI that it has to take in the data in order to further improve itself? Or is it possible for the data to not go anywhere?
Ryan, do you want to go first, or do you want me to hop in?
I can go first since mine's probably not the full answer, and you can round it up. I'd say with my kind of basic knowledge of coding and experiences working with quite big tech companies with data, I'm skeptical myself. I know some like Snapchat model themselves with the delete and kind of keep it encrypted, but I've had quite a few Equifax emails telling me my own data has been leaked. And then also I get the ads that I get. I guess I don't have a full answer, but for myself, I'd say skeptical with the targeted ads and things I've seen before. But I'll pass on to Rose. She has a more technical, I'm sure.
No, you are absolutely right. And actually, it's a brilliant question, Eric, because what I should have said was apparent privacy, because it's not private at all. But it is in the moment an opportunity for students to feel that they're not surrounded by their classmates. They're not, the human teacher isn't there listening to them. And therefore they feel more able to potentially fail by pronouncing something incorrectly or getting a declination wrong or whatever it is. But you're right, it's not really private in the larger sense, because of course the machine learning can't learn unless it collects data all the time about learners and improves itself. So absolutely. And of course, that data is supposed to be anonymized, but anonymization is incredibly complicated. And so there is always a risk. And I think that then comes into the more general question around ethics, which is not just about when the data is collected or how it's stored, it's about when the data's processed. There's a lot to that. So it's a really good point to pick up on, Eric, because you're right. I did say private, and I should have said apparently private, because on the one hand, it feels like it is, but actually in reality, there is a lot of data being collected about each individual. And if they are speaking, for example, although that data may be as anonymized as it's possible to anonymize it, but if in the background there's, I don't know, a church bell ringing, a cat meowing, and a child shouting, "Mom, I need this," you're actually starting to get quite a lot of contextual data that might make that anonymization invalid. So really important to pick up on that.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts there. It was interesting to hear Rose and Rupert, yourself, sort of, talking about working on this for some time when you were doing your PhD. So that must have been all of 5 or 6 years ago for the two of you. Would you say we are there already? Do you think there is something available on the market now for either institutions, learners, or teachers, AI-based, that's done, ready to go, usable?
Well, I think Rose is the expert on that one. I would say, personally, I'm kind of suspicious. Obviously, it's happening with Squirrel AI in China, with Centurion in Europe. As Sparks are using, they don't call it AI, but and this adaptive to each individual learner process is clearly very good. But it only serves some quite narrow functions, and I am very interested in how we can use AI to also help children to think for themselves, because education inevitably is much more than just learning predefined skills that can be automated in this way. It's also about expanding your identity, about relationships with human beings, normally teachers, but with your larger community. And you can't replace that with these kind of AI systems. But I'm hoping we can use collaborative AI to sort of facilitate that induction into a community. Sorry, I'm talking too much. What do you think, Rose?
No, not at all, Rupert. I agree. What we have at the moment are the systems that are well designed, and they're not all well designed, but the systems that are well designed are very good at doing some parts of the process. So you have companies like Carnegie Learning in the US, it's a university spin-off, they're very good at that individual tutoring model, particularly in STEM subjects, but also in language learning. But it's only part of the story of learning a language. Then you have things like N-Skills, which is an English language application that's built by Alelo, that is an avatar-based system. So you have a conversation with a character on the screen. And that obviously has strengths in helping with your speaking, listening skills, as well as many of the other elements of learning a language. So you have bits of the story, but you don't have the whole story. But yeah, there are AI systems out there that are being scaled. In the UK, we have Century Tech, which is looking at is a machine learning platform for learning across the curriculum. Rupert's mentioned Squirrel in China. There are lots of systems out there. And of course, the one I probably shouldn't mention, but is very, very popular is Duolingo. And actually, you know, it doesn't do it all, does it? But it does a little bit of it. And a lot of people get engaged in learning language. So there is scale, but it's not scale of the richness that Rupert's talking about that's so important. It's just bits of the puzzle.
Thank you. Rupert, something you said really sparked a thought in me. So you said that it's important for learners to learn collaborative learning and critical thinking, very crucially. Now, one thing that we've come to hear more and more about over the past 3 or 4 years or thereabouts is the algorithms that are deployed by social media, like Facebook, for example, that have ended up dumping us into our own echo chambers. Are these related? Is this effectively a form of?
I mean, personally, I do think people rather exaggerate, and they're blaming Facebook and Twitter algorithms for their own incredibly bad behavior. I have been using Facebook and Twitter since the beginning, and I think it's actually marvelous how you can learn together with communities around the world. You don't need to keep shouting at them, and you can link to other. Anyway, apart from that, clearly there are algorithms that are designed to sell products. So what I would really hope is something like Wikipedia, in a way, or perhaps philanthropically based, a global social media system designed for learning. And they're quite small tweaks you could make. Moderation really is not as hard as people think if you immediately remove anything that's queried or challenged. And indeed, part of what I'm talking about is the idea that we could design plugins for Facebook, for example, that would support dialogue, that would and there are various structured ways. You know, well, why do you? When we got children to work together and young people with structured frameworks, why do you think that? Can you give a reason? Do you agree? Because, and so on. You could radically improve the quality of the dialogue, and they quite liked it because there's a tension there of having to challenge people. And if everyone knows you're playing a game and it's being supported by the system, then it's easier, which is, I think, what Rose was saying. People actually, many people, for example, people on the autistic spectrum, they relate much better to machines than to human beings because they know they're not being judged. So AI edu bots, as it were, chat bots, working with social media, I think would have a tremendous function in improving the quality of the dialogue and breaking us out of these echo chambers and forcing people to think, but in a way that doesn't lead to violence, if it were, that leads to understanding.
I think there's huge possibility. Sorry, Eric, can I just answer? I think you're right, Rupert. There's huge possibilities for that, but I do worry that in the instance of an organisation like Facebook, because of their business model, that their interest is very much in manipulating people's behaviour, and that's a problem with the kind of setting that you're suggesting, which I think is great. But I think we'd have to be careful about with whom that was done. And I think there are organisations, as I say, like Facebook, who are driven by very different motives to people like yourself, myself, and Cambridge and Ryan. That's not their interest. So we do have to be aware of that and be careful of that. That's all I wanted to say.
Who's to say that educational bots are legitimate when the other bots that are let loose on Facebook are not? What about the ethics of it? Who are we to say that our point of view is more valid than theirs?
Well, sorry, Ryan hasn't had a chance. Ryan, what do you think we should do?
Oh, yeah, I'll go to that first. I'm just picturing the plugin that Rupert described as kind of like Grammarly, where it highlights what I've said. And are you sure you want to say this? Here's another way you could say that. Exactly. And then maybe another, you have to click here. It has inflammatory words. Click both these boxes and answer the CAPTCHA. Come back in 20 minutes. Are you sure you still want to write this?
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as the other bots going in, I've actually thought quite a bit about that myself, the bots. I was quite interesting that there's obviously bots going and the followers, and just I think bigger than the bots are the memes or the things that demand, like that my grandmother reposts, because if you don't repost it, then like the chain letters reincarnate in a way. I feel like those, just as much as bots, are maybe not programmed as much, but just the visual cues on them kind of give them a life of themselves as well.
It's very easy to blame the AI. I mean, I think that was interesting in the summer last year with the mutant algorithm, as Boris Johnson described the exam grading algorithm. Actually, the algorithm wasn't mutant at all. The algorithm did precisely what it'd been designed to do. And I think, so you're right, Rupert, when you say it's people doing nasty things to each other, or it's the people encouraging your grandma, Ryan, to send on a chain. It used to be done by letter and now it's done by Twitter. So it's not the AI in and of itself. It is us. It's the way that we drive its use that I think we need to recognize that's part of the issue here, because you can do marvelous things with AI. And part of the ethical issue for me is, how do we manage to make sure that we don't fall foul of our ethical responsibility to ensure that people can benefit from AI when it comes to learning, because we're not paying enough attention to keeping developers clean, if you like, really trying to make sure that they do produce things and that are ethical and do behave ethically. And also that we help people understand enough to know when they should be careful. So I think it's a really, it's not simple, that's for sure.
But I am impressed by how we have achieved things in the past. And I find Wikipedia pretty impressive. It's been around for a while. I don't get the feeling it's manipulating me. And I don't see why it's beyond the wit of human beings to create some kind of global education system for everybody that would be useful. I'm not sure how much even money it would take. Taking it away from the commercial algorithms of the existing companies and creating something that's specifically designed to promote learning together collaboratively with others. Actually, I mean, I've seen systems with those kind of designs. There are programs that work globally, like Generation Global and others that we could build on. So in a way, it's a kind of political commercial project which you and I should, hopefully I can get your support for, Rose. That's partly why we're trying to create an institute at
Yeah.
Cambridge, which we could marshal this benevolence, as it were, towards. There's so much invested in education everywhere. Why not create a global platform for everybody to learn together safely?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
With
Definitely.
AI support, of course, you would need massive AI support to maximize that, and you can see how that could work, you know.
I'd like to turn to some questions from the floor then. The first question is from Evgeny, who works for the Moscow International Academy, and whose question is to Rose. What other perspectives, apart from being used in language assessment, AI has in relation to teaching English?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I was very struck by, I think it was Ryan who referred to the adaptive testing as being when most teachers think of, oh yeah, that's the adaptive, you know, and adaptivity is a big part of AI, and it's a shame in a way that it is so much associated with that type of assessment. But coming back to the particular question, there's so much more than assessment, but a lot of the way in which AI can adapt to a learner's needs and tutor, shall we say, rather than teach English, is because it's constantly doing those micro assessments in every moment. So if you think about a system like N-Skills I was describing earlier, you're speaking to an avatar character, and the software is taking in what you're saying and processing it and doing lots and lots of micro assessments about how accurate it is, where the errors might be, what you're saying. So it's in a way, the whole of the adaptive capability of AI does depend on this continuous assessment in order to work out precisely what the right feedback is, what the right support is. But I certainly think that can be valuable in teaching English, but way different to the adaptive testing that we've seen so much of in the past. So I think there's a huge amount of possibility with language learning that isn't focused on assessment as I think you're meaning it in that kind of formal stop and test type assessment. I think with language learning, now that we have very, very good voice recognition, speech analysis, that all of those techniques that can be used to really understand, you know, where a student is not pronouncing things correctly, why, and how to help with that. With listening, you know, being able to adapt the speed, adapt pronunciation, adapt how much the student is having to take in at that moment. All of those things can be helpful. I think in terms of writing, it's harder, but not impossible. It's certainly in terms of reading, there's lots of ways in which AI can bring that ability to adapt to vary the complexity of a text, for example, in and of the moment. I mean, we can all do that, but the AI can do it very fast. And so in and of the moment, there's a variation going on. So I think there's a lot that isn't assessment qua assessment that actually really can be done by AI. I just think we constantly need to make sure that the AI has been designed well and ethically.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you, Evgeny, for that question. Another question from Antonio, and Rupert, this one might be one for you. Antonio says, I'm not familiar with AI for collaborative learning and dialogue, but I find our talk fascinating. Is there anything you could recommend on the basics of the topic? Any books or publication of yours, for example, or any websites, I suppose?
No, I'm afraid there isn't very much at all. I've written a lot about the kind of theory of it, but mostly there have been a few research projects which show that it's very, in a way, it's quite shocking that there's so little. I don't know if Rose agrees with me, but I've been doing the literature review recently, and there are a few studies of how chatbots have supported the quality of dialogue in communities, but it's quite a simple thing to do. One perhaps closest is Differ. I don't know, quite a few universities are using a chatbot to welcome people and introduce them to each other, which is quite a simple thing to do for well-being, for students being isolated when they're online in communities. And it's such a small step to then turn that into something of a moderator and saying, well, not only are you introducing people with shared interests, which is something we mentioned earlier, but you could go a little bit further and say, well, why do you think that? And perhaps you could explain and that sort of thing. So it really can be done, and we are working on it. We have research projects to do it, but I'm not aware that there's very much written about it so far. Is that right, Rose? What do you think?
It's really interesting, Rupert. I don't think that if we go back to the very, very early days, and you'll remember this, actually one of the first ever AI systems was a dialogue system. It was terrible. Well, it was called ELIZA, and it fell over very quickly. You remember that, you know, because it was just pattern matching.
Yeah, but because it was so simple.
Yeah, exactly. But actually took a lot of people in. But now we have much more powerful AI. I agree. I think there's a huge amount of possibilities. And there is a lot of work in the chatbot space, but I think some of the other work that's not explicitly about dialogue, but that might be an ingredient here is the work being done in learning analytics and some sort of intelligent learning analytics. So it's not specifically AI, and it may not specifically be focused on dialogue, but there are some quite nice pieces of work that look at analysing collaborative dialogues, for example, using learning analytics techniques that might be worth looking at. But no, I think it's not something that, and I hate to say this, but if we look at what drives the products we end up seeing that are scaled, it's commercial value. And until we have commercial value put on this kind of dialogue, which you and I both know is fundamental to teaching and learning, but the systems that sell at the moment are the ones that are going to help you get a better GCSE grade in maths or physics. And that do you see what I mean? I'm being obviously oversimplifying, but I think part of the reason that those systems are not there at scale is that the narrative has not been strong. But perhaps now we're at a place where that might change, because we've kind of got that base layer of system that can do the tutoring parts. So now perhaps we can engage people's interests more in precisely what you're talking about, Rupert. I hope so.
Thank you very much. I'm aware we have run 3 minutes over, but there's one more question I'd like to pose. So audience members, if you are able to stay on, and panelists, fantastic. If not, if you need to go, that's fine. This question, this one's for Ryan, and picks up on something you said about the need for teachers to be upskilled on all of this. If you think of teacher training, what 2 or 3 top concepts around AI do you think should find their way into teacher training or teacher development programs?
Ooh, I think just a basic introduction to, as Rose was saying, to what's going on in those computer adaptive testing and the potential around that. And then I think just maybe a simple way to empower them to I don't want to promote any certain applications or anything, but to find a program that maybe does some self-grading quizzes, that they can program some quizzes themselves and choose what the answers are, play with some personalized feedback so that they can kind of have their input into those, because they can, use certain software to grade it if it's wrong. Say you put B, it was A because of this, and have the teacher feedback so they can see that it does have a human element to it. And then I'd say the third one would be to, I'm not sure about the training in England, but where I trained in California, there wasn't enough focus on technology in general. So I'd say to just step it up and include it in the technology training in general. It's more than setting up a PowerPoint and turning on the projector, which you'd be surprised how many people really need help with just those tasks. But so kind of a few steps before that. But
okay, so quite sort of nuts and bolts, really. Yeah, fantastic. I'm afraid we'll have to draw things to close there. Thank you so much, Rupert, Rose, and Ryan. Wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for an inspiring talk. There is questions there in the chat window as well. But we're going to have to close there. Thank you again to the 3 of you. Thank you to the audience and to your...
It's a pleasure, really enjoyable.
And
thanks very much, everyone. Great to see you again, Rose. We'll have to catch up. Can we invite
you? We will. Definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.